Mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye across the kitchen table and said I was the worst thing that had ever happened to her son. She said I had trapped him, manipulated him, and that one day he would wake up and realize what a mistake he had made. Then she told me to take my unborn child and find somewhere else to live. My husband sat next to her the entire time and said nothing. Not one word. 7 years later, I was sitting in my home office in a townhouse I owned outright in Westmount, Quebec, when my phone rang. It was my husband's younger sister, Felicity. She told me their mother had been calling around to everyone in the family. She was sick. The money was gone, and she wanted to talk to me. I set the phone down on my desk and looked out the window at the street below, at the maple trees that were just starting to turn, and I felt something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt very, very tired of a story that was supposed to have ended a long time ago. My name is Serena. I was 26 years old when my marriage fell apart, and my mother-in-law told me I was nothing. And I want to tell you exactly how I got from that kitchen table to that townhouse, because the path was longer and stranger than I ever imagined it would be. I grew up in Saskatoon, the kind of middle-class upbringing where there was always enough but never quite plenty. My father drove a city transit bus for 30 years. My mother worked part-time at a pharmacy and raised me and my younger brother, mostly on her own energy and strong opinions. We weren't wealthy, but I never went to bed hungry, and there was always a library card in my wallet. I read constantly. I got good grades because I liked learning, not because anyone pushed me. I was, by most measures, an ordinary girl from an ordinary family, which is probably why I was so dazzled when I met my husband's family. I met him at university in Montreal. He was studying finance. I was studying social work, which his mother later told me was not really a career. He was charming in the way that certain men from certain families are charming. Easy, polished, effortlessly at home in every room. His family had money. Not generational wealth, but the second-generation kind, the kind where the grandfather had built something from nothing and the children had grown up comfortable and expected to stay that way. His mother, Rosalie, had opinions about everything: what neighborhood people should live in, what schools children should attend, what kind of woman was appropriate for her son. I was not that kind of woman. She told him this early. He told me she would come around. I believed him because I was 23 and in love, and had not yet learned that some people do not come around. They simply wait. We got married in a small ceremony at a hotel in Old Montreal. Rosalie cried at the reception, and not in the way that mothers cry at weddings. She cried in the way of someone who believes they are witnessing a mistake being made in real time. My own mother held my hand at the table and said, quietly, "You don't have to convince anyone to love you." I smiled and told her Rosalie would warm up. My mother nodded and said nothing further, because she was the kind of woman who only said things once. For 2 years, I tried. I brought wine to Sunday dinners. I asked questions about family history. I learned which topics to avoid: his father's business failures, the cousin who had moved away and never came back, anything related to money or inheritance. I was careful and kind and utterly exhausted by the effort of it. Rosalie was not cruel to my face. She was the particular kind of hostile that operates entirely through implication. A pause before answering a question, a compliment that was actually a criticism if you listened carefully, a way of addressing her son as though I wasn't in the room. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. I was 26. We were in a rented apartment in Plateau, Montreal. My husband had just started a new position at a financial firm his uncle owned. I had been working for a community services organization, running support programs for low-income families. We weren't settled the way I had imagined we'd be before having children. But I wasn't unhappy. I thought a baby might soften things. I thought wrong. When we told Rosalie, she went quiet in a way that filled the entire room. Then she said she needed a moment and walked into the kitchen. My husband followed her. I sat in the living room alone for 11 minutes. I know because I counted, staring at the same family photograph on the wall, a professional portrait from some summer in Muskoka years before I existed in their story. When he came back, his face told me everything before his mouth did. He said his mother was upset. He said she had concerns. I asked what kind of concerns one has about a grandchild, and he couldn't quite answer. 3 weeks later, I was in that kitchen, and Rosalie said what she had apparently been saying about me for years, finally to my face: that I had manipulated her son into marriage, that I had used a pregnancy to trap him into staying, that I was not the kind of woman who built families. I was the kind of woman who destroyed them. She said this calmly, the way people say things they have rehearsed. And my husband sat at the table with his hands folded and did not tell her to stop. I left that night, not because she told me to, because I looked at him sitting there, and I understood something with terrible clarity. He had made his choice. It had nothing to do with me. I had $2,300 in a savings account that was entirely my own. I had kept it separate since the beginning because my mother had told me once, almost casually, that a woman should always have money that belongs only to her. I had a car that was in my name. I had a best friend named Claudette who lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Rosemont and said yes before I finished asking. The next 4 months were the hardest of my life. I applied for EI maternity benefits while I was still technically employed and quietly terrified. I found a family mediator because I knew my husband's family had lawyers and I did not want to be caught unprepared. I ate a lot of soup that Claudette made in enormous pots on Sunday afternoons, and I watched a lot of television I don't remember. And I cried in the shower where she couldn't hear me. I did not want her to see how frightened I was. I was trying to be the kind of person who held together under pressure, even though I had never been tested this way before. My daughter was born in the spring on a Thursday afternoon at the Jewish General Hospital. I named her Wren. Claudette held my hand through the entire labor because I had asked her to, and because my husband had texted to say he would try to come, but there were things he needed to sort out with his family first. He did not come. I held Wren for the first time alone in a hospital room, and I made her a silent promise that she would never wait for someone who was still sorting out their priorities. The divorce took 14 months. His family's lawyer was expensive and strategic in ways that extended everything. My own lawyer, a sharp and unhurried woman named Miss Prius. A Chibe, who I found through a legal aid referral and then paid in installments, told me to document everything and speak to no one in his family without her knowing. I did exactly that. In the end, I received child support set at the federal guidelines, a share of what little we had accumulated together, and a clean separation. No drama, no confrontation. Just paperwork and finality. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Verdun that I could afford on my salary, plus the support payments, and I started to figure out what I was actually capable of when no one was watching. I had spent 2 years in my marriage making myself smaller. I had taken the part-time position at the community organization, partly because it fit around his schedule, around Sunday dinners, around all the social obligations of being a daughter-in-law who was always trying to prove she belonged. Alone with Wren, with no one to manage and nothing to perform, I discovered I was much better at my work than I had allowed myself to be. I went back to school online while Wren slept. I finished a graduate certificate in nonprofit management at Concordia over 2 years, mostly between 10 at night and 1 in the morning, with a baby monitor on my desk and cold coffee I kept forgetting to drink. I got a promotion at the organization, then another. It developed a housing support program that ended up being used as a model by 3 other organizations in Quebec. I was quoted in a Montreal Gazette article about housing instability, and I remember staring at my name in print and feeling something shift in me. Not pride exactly, but the recognition that I was building something that was genuinely mine. By the time Wren was 4, I was earning more than I ever had. By the time she was 6, I had saved enough for a down payment on a property. The townhouse in Westmount was more than I had imagined for myself when I was sleeping on Claudette's couch, but not more than I had worked for. I bought it on a gray November morning and cried in the kitchen, which was a very good kitchen with excellent light, and I thought about my mother telling me I shouldn't have to convince anyone to love me. I had stopped trying, and in stopping, I had ended up exactly where I wanted to be. Ren was 7 when Felicity called. She was in grade 2 at a French immersion school 3 blocks from her house. She was learning the violin and had opinions about which cereals were acceptable, and had recently informed me that she planned to be a marine biologist, a chef, or a professional dog walker, and that she hadn't decided yet. She was the most fully realized person I had ever met. I called Felicity back the next morning. I told her I had heard what she said and I appreciated her reaching out, and I wanted to be honest with her because she had always been kind to me in ways the rest of the family hadn't. I said I was not in a position to help Rosalie financially. I said I had no animosity toward her. I said that the decision to keep Ren's grandmother out of her life had not been made in anger. It had been made carefully over a long time, and it stood. Felicity was quiet. Then she said she understood. Then she said, she asks about Ren sometimes. And I said I believed that, and that I was sorry for whatever version of grief Rosalie was carrying, but that I was not the appropriate person to ease it. 2 weeks later, Rosalie herself called. I don't know how she got my number. I let it ring. She left a voicemail that I listened to once, standing in the hallway, while Ren was at school and the house was very quiet. Rosalie's voice was older than I remembered. She said she had made mistakes. She said she had been wrong about me. She said she hoped we could talk. I stood there for a long time after the message ended. I thought about the kitchen table. I thought about my husband's hands folded in front of him, his silence a kind of consent. I thought about the hospital room and Claudette's hand in mine and my daughter's face the first time I held her, this expression of absolute trust that I had done nothing yet to deserve and everything since to honor. I did not call back. This is the part that people sometimes push back on when I tell this story. Some ask whether I should give her a chance now that she's older, now that she regrets it. Some suggest that forgiveness is for me, not for her, which is something I genuinely believe. I had forgiven Rosalie years ago in the private accounting I do with myself at the end of difficult days. Forgiving someone does not mean reopening the door. It means you stop letting them live rent-free in the place where your peace should be. Ren does not know her paternal grandmother exists. I made that decision when she was very young, and I thought about it seriously, and I would make it again. What my daughter knows is that she is loved specifically and consistently. She knows that the people in her life chose to be there. She knows Claudette, who is her unofficial aunt and makes those Sunday pots of soup to this day. She knows my parents, who drive in from Saskatoon twice a year and take up the whole guest room and bicker about the temperature and are the most reliable people I have ever known. She knows her father, whom she sees on his custody schedule, who has grown into a more honest person than he was at 28, which I credit to the fact that he eventually had to account for himself without his family making his decisions. That is between the two of them, and I have no opinion about it. What Ren does not know, because she is 7 and there is time, is that she was the reason I stopped being afraid. When I was alone in that hospital room, I could not afford the luxury of falling apart. I had a person depending on me who had not yet learned how to ask. That small emergency kept me upright through the worst of it, and then the habit of standing became something else, something that belonged to me rather than being borrowed from necessity. I am 33 years old. I run a program that has helped house over 400 families in the past 3 years. I own a property. I have a daughter who calls Claudette by a name she made up when she was 2.5, and which has stuck permanently. I have a life that is exactly as large as I made it. There are people who look at what happened and see a story about a terrible mother-in-law. I understand why. But when I look at it, I see something different. I see a version of myself at 26 who was so busy trying to earn her place at a table that had never wanted her there that she had forgotten to build her own. Being pushed away from that table was the cruelest thing Rosalie ever did to me. It also happened to be the most useful. I don't thank her for it. That would be too neat, and real life is not neat. But I don't hate her either. She is an old woman in a house I have never been back to, and she made choices that led her exactly where she is. I made choices that led me here in this office, in this light, watching the maple trees turn from my own window. Ren came home from school that afternoon with a drawing she had made in art class, a house with a green door, ours, and a figure with dark hair, which was me, and a smaller figure with hair that went in 6 directions at once, which was her. Beside us, she had drawn a dog, which we do not have and which she has been requesting with increasing sophistication for approximately a year and a half. I put it on the refrigerator next to the other ones. Then I made dinner, and we ate it together at our kitchen table, and she told me about her day with the complete seriousness that 7-year-olds bring to things that matter to them, which is everything. And I listened to every word. This is what I built from nothing. I would not trade a single room of it. I think about Rosalie sometimes, not with anger, but the way you think about a weather event that changed your plans and ended up sending you somewhere better. There's a cause and effect to the way my life unfolded that I didn't understand while I was living through it, but that I see clearly now. Every door she closed pushed me toward a room I hadn't known to look for. That's not fate. It's just what happens when you refuse to stop moving. What carried me through wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that, because I think people sometimes hear stories like mine and assume there was a turning point, a single moment of grace that made everything possible. There wasn't. There was just the daily decision to be a person I could respect, even when that was the hardest available option. When I was sitting in Claudette's spare room with $2,300 and a pregnancy and no clear plan, I made a choice about the kind of woman I was going to be. Not the kind who waits to be rescued, not the kind who shrinks to fit a space that was never built for her. The kind who figures it out. That figuring out required me to think more clearly than I ever had before. I had spent 2 years in my marriage making intuitive decisions softened by wishful thinking that Rosalie would warm up, that my husband would find his backbone, that love would be enough to smooth over the structural problems in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. Alone, I couldn't afford that kind of thinking anymore. I had to understand my actual situation, my real resources, what was genuinely possible and what wasn't. That shift, from hoping to thinking, was the most useful thing that happened to me in those first months. It sounds cold. It wasn't. It was the most loving thing I could do for Ren, to see our circumstances clearly and act on what was real. And then there was the question of who I wanted to be when it was over. I could have let what Rosalie said calcify into something bitter that I carried around for the rest of my life. Some days I wanted to. There is a version of this story where I spend years being defined by what was done to me, where every success is secretly a message directed at her, where I never fully arrive in my own life because I'm still standing in that kitchen. I chose differently. Not because I'm unusually forgiving, but because I understood that staying attached to that table was its own kind of imprisonment. The integrity of moving forward without cruelty, not calling her back, not sending a letter, not engineering a confrontation. That was the standard I held myself to. Not for her sake, for Ren's, for mine. Ren is growing up, watching a woman who builds things. I think that matters more than any single lesson I could teach her. She sees that you can be hurt and not become hard. She sees that you can draw a line without crossing into cruelty. She sees that a family is something you construct with intention, from people who choose you back. I don't know what difficulties are ahead of her. I know there will be some, because that is the nature of being alive. But I hope that when they come, she'll remember that her mother once had nothing and built something anyway, not because someone believed in her, because she decided to believe in herself first and let the results speak from there. That's the whole story. That's all it ever was.